Prince Harry just dropped another verbal grenade, and this one might have scorched whatever was left of the royal olive branch. The shockwaves are already rattling Buckingham Palace, leaving everyone wondering, is Harry speaking his truth or just burning every bridge he has left? Prince Harry just dropped another verbal grenade, and this one might have scorched whatever was left of the royal olive branch. In a brand new interview that's already got palace walls shaking, Harry opens up again, and this time it's not just about his usual targets. It's about the monarchy, his father, King Charles, and how he sees his role in the whole royal saga. The guy may be in Ukraine doing charity work, but somehow it's what he said about his family from a moving train that's echoing across Buckingham Palace like a war horn. So, let's start with the big headline. Harry claims once again that his conscience is clear. Yep, even after Spare, the Oprah interview, Netflix drama, security lawsuits, and years of royal mudslinging, the man insists he feels no guilt. According to him, he wasn't airing dirty laundry. He was just correcting the narrative. That's his story, and he's sticking to it. But the timing? That's where things get murky. Just days before, he'd been seen reconnecting with his cancer-stricken father. And now, here he is basically saying, yeah, I'd do it all over again. Bold move, Harry. But it didn't stop there. When asked if he regrets making his grievances so public, Harry gave a hard no. He doubled down, saying the book was the only way to get the truth out. The truth, according to Harry, isn't something you sugarcoat, and apparently he still doesn't believe Spare or anything else he said was harsh. The fallout, however, tells a different story. Palace insiders are reportedly fuming, calling the interview tone-deaf and disrespectful, especially with Charles's health now a matter of public concern. And then, of course, there's the subtle jab, or maybe not so subtle, depending on how you read it. Harry suggests the focus in the coming year has to be on my dad. He wants to see more of King Charles. That alone wouldn't be controversial, except that it feels like he's trying to highlight how bad the king's condition might actually be. Whether intentional or not, it's like he's planting a public reminder that time might be running out. While some may see that as touching or responsible, palace aides are calling it downright cruel. One senior royal source even said, he acts like repeating these stories helps, but it just twists the knife. And that's the general sentiment coming out of the royal inner circle. Every time they think Harry might be softening, he unleashes another media moment that drags everything back into chaos. Even his defenders are starting to squirm. Like, you can't just talk about wanting reconciliation and then toss verbal grenades every few months. But Harry doesn't see it that way. To him, this isn't revenge, it's accountability. He wants the press to stop smearing him. He wants the narrative to change, and in his mind, this is the only way to get there. Yet, it's hard not to notice the contradiction. He claims he's done with fighting, but every new quote feels like another swing at the hornet's nest. And let's be honest, at this point, even his most patient family members are probably out of stingers. Meanwhile, there's Meghan, barely mentioned in the interview. The only reference? A comment she once made about how telling the truth is the most efficient way to live. And Harry clearly took that advice to heart. Whether that truth is unfiltered or slightly shaded, though, is up for debate. But make no mistake, he believes every word. And that belief, that unshakable sense of righteousness, might be what's keeping this royal rift alive. Because for Harry, the truth doesn't just set you free, it sets everything on fire. The optics of Prince Harry's latest appearance aren't helping his case either. There, he was visiting Ukraine as part of his Invictus mission, being photographed near war memorials, meeting wounded soldiers, and talking about resilience. On the surface, it's the kind of cause anyone would respect. He's pushing for new recovery systems, encouraging prosthetic athletes, and trying to set up sports facilities for veterans across Ukraine. But the moment the interview dropped, critics started to question his motives. Was this about the mission, or was it another PR move wrapped in good intentions? Because let's be real, Harry knows how to work a camera, and the media picked up on it fast. The walking stick, the somber train rides, the quiet moments at memorials, it's all very polished. It's hard not to wonder if every step is carefully framed for narrative impact. The irony? He says he hates staged photos, claims he doesn't do them. But that doesn't mean the message isn't managed. In fact, with every quote and photo, it feels like Harry's crafting a version of himself he wants the public to believe. Principled, misunderstood, and unbothered. Further on in the interview, Harry says his most dominant quote of success is unbothered and unbothered. Then came the not-so-subtle flex about being quite Ukrainian in attitude. According to Harry, the locals have embraced him because, like them, he does his own thing. That line alone had people raising eyebrows. It's the kind of statement that sounds humble but drips with ego. It's also textbook Harry, positioning himself as a rebel with depth, invoking Princess Diana again, saying he gets it from her. That's where it hit emotional nerves. People loved Diana because she was authentic, not because she said she was. And some think Harry leans too hard on that legacy when he needs public sympathy. As for his emotional state, he swears he's fine. Despite the headlines, despite the tension, Harry insists he's happy. Not just content, but fulfilled. He says the press gets it wrong, that they spin him as miserable and lost. He pushes back against that image, claiming he's at peace with where he's at and who he's become. But whether it's defiance or denial, it's hard to ignore the undertone of frustration in his words. You don't keep defending your happiness that much unless you're trying to convince someone, maybe even yourself. He brings up the press a lot, and not just in passing. It's clear he sees them as the core villain in this saga. He accuses them of trying to control the public narrative and of being out of touch with the real British people. According to him, they are the reason reconciliation feels impossible. They are the reason people think he's angry, bitter, or ungrateful. And that fixation on media betrayal keeps cropping up, like a wound that refuses to heal. Even his legal battles are framed as righteous missions. He's still suing major British tabloids. And the way he talks about it, it's less about justice and more about principle. He wants change. He wants the media held accountable. But what he doesn't seem to grasp, or refuses to admit, is that his constant talking is part of the same cycle. Every new interview becomes ammo. Every quote becomes a headline. And even though he says he wants peace, he keeps handing the press more fire. The palace, meanwhile, is reportedly beyond frustrated. One insider called his remarks a gut punch, especially the ones implying time might be running out for Charles. Others say the family feels blindsided, that they opened a small door for reunion and Harry barged through it with cameras rolling. For a family that lives by the mantra never complain, never explain, his approach feels like betrayal all over again. There's a recurring pattern that's becoming impossible to ignore. Prince Harry says he wants to heal things, but every time he opens his mouth to explain himself, he somehow makes the fracture worse. Whether he realizes it or not, he's rewriting the rulebook. But he's doing it with a sledgehammer. His latest statements about truth being a prerequisite for reconciliation might sound noble on paper, but when that truth is filtered through his lens, it feels more like a justification to keep the microphone on. That line, "You cannot have reconciliation before you have truth," has already ignited fury behind palace walls. To the public, it might seem like a call for honesty. To the royal family, it's an accusation. It suggests that Harry sees himself as the only one telling the truth, the one righteous voice in a sea of silence. That kind of framing doesn't leave much room for dialogue, it just points fingers. And behind the scenes, the message being received is crystal clear. Harry still sees himself as the victim, and he still expects the monarchy to admit guilt before there's any hope of peace. And then there's the issue of timing. Right after a rare and fragile reconnection with King Charles, who was, according to reports, fighting a very serious illness, Harry releases these public remarks that feel emotionally detached, even opportunistic. A line about life being precious, a vague comment about wanting to focus more on his father, and then silence. No warmth, no affection, just strategy. That's how many insiders are seeing it. And frankly, it's not hard to understand why. Adding fuel to the fire, Harry defended Spare once again, calling it necessary, truthful, and absolutely worth it. Even after all the backlash, all the family fallout, he's still saying he'd do it again. That book wasn't just a memoir. It was a public execution of private moments. Stories about William, jabs at Camilla, and painful memories that were never his alone to tell. He might feel like it was cleansing, but to those he wrote about, it felt like betrayal carved in ink. What's even more jarring is how Harry separates himself from responsibility. When asked about how the public perceives him, he deflects. If someone thinks he's stubborn, he says it's just principles. If someone sees him as bitter, he says it's media manipulation. There's no reflection, no pause to consider whether his actions, however well-intentioned, have caused damage. It's always someone else's narrative, someone else's fault. And yet, in the same breath, he says he feels supported by the British public. That's a tricky statement because while it's true, some still admire him, a large chunk of the public now views him as out of touch, overly sensitive, and ironically, a bit too obsessed with his own portrayal. It's hard to claim moral high ground when you're flying private from charity trips and monetizing family wounds. The contradictions are piling up, and people are starting to notice. In the end, Harry's biggest problem might not be the press or even the palace, it's his mouth.